Hey, Synergy. I'm Ralph. I am the pastor of worship and education at a college church on the campus of Purdue University. Al had asked me to come and to share some of my experience in what it looks like to welcome a younger generation into church and into family. And so I'm excited to share with you guys today. I have been a church boy my whole life, a kid who actually loved church. I love singing and learning and being part of a community. And I honestly, I don't remember a time when I've not just loved Jesus from my depths. The divine has always been a source of connection and joy and peace for me. And church family was just like part of that deal. And so it was just part of who I was. Um, and I was a pretty gifted kid. I was, weird, always reading my Bible on my own. I started leading worship at 13, 14 years old, leading Bible studies and after school programs for younger kids. And I think there was this sense just from the leaders of the church that I didn't really need much input. In some senses, my maturity was closer to the leaders than to my peers. And so my whole childhood, no one ever asked me to go further. And of course, they let me lead, assumed that I would be part of that, but they never discipled me. They never mentored me into more. And there were so many people in the community that I looked up to and that I longed to be invested in and to be called into something more, but no one ever asked. And there's more to the story for sure, but the thing that struck me as I was reflecting on that experience is just how easy it would have been for any leader in our community to take me deeper in discipleship and leadership. And so, just thinking and praying through today, I felt two real invitations that I wanted to share with you, with your community there across the Atlantic. And the first is this: just ask. There is a longing in the hearts of every generation to be called into more, to be seen, to be named as significant and valuable, and also that they're capable of more. So if you're wavering on whether or not discipleship and mentoring is wanted, and certainly there's resistance and there can be baggage, and not everyone is open at all times, but the desire is there. And so the rejection is worth the risk. We've got to ask. We've got to ask. But the real thing that I felt pressed to share today is not just that we ask, but who do we ask? Who are the people that we see as leaders and we invite deeper? And it's something that I have bumped into in the past few years, swimming around in the 3DM, DMM, missional movement world, is this emphasis on raising up leaders. And this is wonderful, and it's right, right? It's about not just doing it yourself, but on teaching others to do it and to pass it on. But sometimes within this emphasis, there is a tendency to highlight certain kinds of leaders, that those who are naturally gifted, who are maybe already expressing these leadership traits, who are maybe already in leadership, extroverted, gifted, relational, sociable, excitable, talented, secure in their theology and their faith, and just ready to go out and do the gospel stuff. And obviously, we need this energy, and the capacity of these individuals is really important for mission and for growth and for the church. But I think if our leadership eyes are always drawn to these sorts of leaders, we end up missing half of the population. And importantly, I think we are missing a strategically essential group, excluding accidentally from leadership the sorts of people who carry what the church needs to thrive in the context right now. That is so different and new and changing and challenging. And so my current context is primarily university students. And this last year I led these two classes, and I just called them intensives. But over the course of 5 weeks or so, I just took 15 to 20 students really deep on theological topics. Really just about what does it mean to have a faithful theology, to dig into why we actually think about God in certain ways. What does it mean to live that out? And one of the most powerful and surprising moments in both of these intensives, I think it really reveals this idea of who we often overlook when we are discipling and raising up leaders. We were talking about this idea that good theology is less about building these concrete, unmovable doctrines and more about growing in faithfulness and wisdom. We were using this imagery from Walter Brueggemann and Richard Rohr. They call it the wisdom path. And it's this threefold movement that you see all throughout Scripture. So you have creation, fall, redemption, law, prophets, wisdom, Psalms of orientation, disorientation, reorientation. Or as we see in the life of Jesus, we have life, crucifixion and death, and resurrection on the other side. And so we labeled each of these points on this wisdom path order, disorder, and reorder. We describe this first position, order, as a place of certainty, of being concerned about being in the right tribe, a place of refusing doubt and questions with strong borders and boundaries. In the second position, down in the valley, we have disorder. It's a place of chaos, of deconstruction, where your world and what you've known is falling apart. It's a place where if you stay here, you end up in despair. And this third position, as you climb this mountain to reorder, is simply the act of moving through the suffering and pain of disorder and then choosing to live on the other side, of embodying a way of life, even if you're not full of certainty, that you're climbing the mountain, but your hands remain open. You're transcending what you knew, but you're including it in your life. You're living faithfully in your context. And so this journey, first of all, is super common for so many people, and not just theology, but life. And what I found is there's often what starts us on this journey is an apocalyptic moment. And apocalypse just means to reveal, but it has kind of this intense, momentous feel to it. Often a catastrophe or a failure or simply a moment when things turn out to be different than you thought. And these apocalyptic moments either cause us to double down and go back into order, or to build our walls tighter and firmer, or we move into the painful but necessary process of disorder and then eventually reorder. Apocalypses give us an invitation to enter the wisdom path. And some people get stuck in disorder. And the younger generation, in my interactions, they spend a lot of time here. And in this place, life becomes chaos. Meaning and purpose become pretty difficult to figure out. And I'm pretty convinced that most people who get stuck here are stuck because they don't know that this is actually part of the normal process of life. It's the normal process of growing in wisdom, and we should welcome it, as it helps us examine our motives. It's actually a place where we meet God because we're finally in a place of authenticity. We're not pretending to have it all together, but we're open and we don't know what's next, and God meets us there. And the discussions that we had during these intensives at this point were so helpful, and they really set the tone for building theology. But the most revealing thing came for me when I asked a question. I'd drawn this out on the whiteboard, and I asked them, in your experience, who on this path is most welcome in the church? And across the board, it was the people in order. The people who don't need to ask the questions, the people who don't have doubts, who are content with their theology and life. They do not want to enter into the harder questions. And some people in the room identified with that impulse. You know, it's easier sometimes to work with people who are sure of themselves. We make them leaders because they can teach a Bible study without falling apart. But others identified with feeling like they didn't belong, feeling like their questions weren't welcomed in the church, that their experience of suffering, their inability to be certain about their faith in some areas was a liability, that it was unwelcome. And so my first invitation was just ask, right? We got to ask people into discipleship. We've got to ask them to join in the leadership process. But my second invitation is this: to keep your eyes open when you ask to people who are on the wisdom path, to seek out people who have experienced an apocalypse who have ended up in the valley, who are asking questions they never did before, because these people might not always exhibit those natural leadership qualities that we're used to, the ones that our eyes are drawn to. But they are doing the hard work of growing in wisdom. And to be frank, the church is full of gifted leaders, but we are pitifully bankrupt of wisdom, and it's destroying our witness in the world. So just real quick, there are two things that I think we can do to help find and cultivate these sorts of leaders. The first thing is we've got to spend less time fortifying our walls and trying to get the younger generation to get back in. And instead, we've got to get down in the valley. Maybe we need to go there with our own questions. Maybe we need our own apocalypses. But we got to go there because there are so many people who are stuck in chaos and disorder and despair, not because they're unwilling to be faithful, but because they don't know there's a path forward into something new. Not back into the old, but into a new wineskin where they can keep their questions and their experience, but they can live into a new faithfulness where they can grow in wisdom. Get down in the valley. Secondly, I think we need to create spaces of apocalypse. And what I mean is that I think we need to create safe spaces where doubts and questions are valued and welcomed, where the wisdom and the experience of people who have been in the valley can help to pull the whole community further into the path of wisdom. In Mark 9, Jesus hears the disciples arguing behind him on the road about who among them is the greatest, whose gifting qualifies them for the top spot. And first he tells them that, this famous line, the greatest of you is the servant of all. The greatest is actually the least of all. And so it's not the one who needs the attention, who draws everything in the room toward themselves, but the one who's willing to give it up, the one who can build up others without needing the recognition. And then he draws their attention to a child, a kid who can't give anything except the openness and vulnerability of trust. And Jesus says that this sort of openness, this authenticity, this vulnerability, that's what the kingdom is like. And Jesus and the child are so open and connected that if you welcome one, he says you get the other. And Jesus and the Father are so open and connected that if you welcome one, you get the other. So when we are looking for the leaders in our communities, would we have our eyes open to the ones who are open enough to ask the hard questions, the ones who are craving connection, those who are primed for the wisdom of the kingdom? The disciples are back on the road, arm wrestling about who among them is the most gifted, and the child is there looking up at Jesus, asking the questions of a child, open to the wisdom of God. Thank you guys for letting me share with you today. I pray a blessing on you and your families and your communities, and that you would know the love of God to your innermost being. Peace, you guys.